Most retellings of Robert's rebellion start with Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. It makes sense. A married prince disappears with the daughter of Winterfell. Her furious brother rides south, and before long, half the realm is at war. If we want the moment when the rebellion actually began, though, we have to look somewhere else. The decision was made in the Vale, after King Aerys sent Jon Arryn a short and impossible order. He wanted the heads of Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon. Ned and Robert had grown up as Jon Arryn's wards. By then, Aerys had already killed Ned's father and older brother. Neither young man had taken part in Brandon Stark's threat against Rhaegar, yet Aerys wanted them executed anyway. Jon could hand over 2 men he had raised, or he could defy the king. Jon refused and called his banners. That is the point the histories treat as the start of Robert's rebellion. Robert had no crown at this stage. The rebels had no neat plan to replace the Targaryens either. They were trying to survive a king who had decided that family ties made them guilty. If you have been following this series, the names behind the crisis will be familiar. Our previous video covered the War of the Ninepenny Kings, including the final Blackfire invasion and Barristan Selmy's rise. I will spare you a second tour of the Stepstones. For this story, we only need 3 young men who came home from that war as friends: Aerys Targaryen, Tywin Lannister, and Steffon Baratheon. Aerys became king in 262 AC and chose Tywin as his hand. They were both young, ambitious, and eager to prove themselves. The first years went well, although Tywin received much of the credit. He was good at the boring work of ruling, which rarely makes for a heroic song, but tends to keep a kingdom running. Aerys grew jealous. He mocked Tywin at court, blocked plans that came from his hand, and rejected a marriage between Cersei and Prince Rhaegar. Their old friendship slowly curdled into a contest that only the king was allowed to win. Steffon Baratheon stayed close to Aerys. The king sent him across the narrow sea to search for a bride of Valyrian blood for Rhaegar. Steffon found no suitable match. His ship went down in Shipbreaker Bay on the journey home, close enough for his sons to watch from Storm's End. Robert inherited the castle as a teenager. He still spent much of his youth in the Vale with Ned and Jon Arryn, so the 3 future rebel leaders already trusted one another, long before anyone raised a banner. Back in King's Landing, Aerys was becoming harder to manage. His imprisonment at Duskendale made things much worse. In 277 AC, Aerys visited Duskendale and was taken prisoner by Lord Darklyn. He remained inside the town for roughly half a year, while Tywin surrounded it with an army. Barristan Selmy eventually slipped through the walls and rescued the king on his own. We covered that mission briefly in the Ninepenny Kings video because it is part of Barristan's legend. For Aerys, the rescue led into a long period of isolation and revenge. He wiped out houses Darklyn and Hollard, apart from the young Dantos Hollard, and shut himself inside the Red Keep for years. He stopped cutting his hair and nails. He distrusted Tywin, Rhaegar, and almost everyone around him. At times, he suspected that his hand and his son had hoped he would die at Duskendale. We know Aerys believed that. We have no evidence that Tywin and Rhaegar had agreed to let him die. The suspicion still shaped everything that followed, because a nervous king could now see a treason plot in any crowded hall. Then, House Went announced the greatest tourney of the age. The tourney at Harrenhal lasted 10 days in 281 AC, during a brief warm season remembered as the False Spring. Hundreds of challengers came for prizes far richer than anyone expected House Went to afford. Years later, Maester Yandel suggested that Prince Rhaegar may have helped pay for it. Varys gave Aerys a more alarming version. Rhaegar meant to gather the great lords and discuss removing his father through an informal Great Council. The alleged council remains a theory. The warning itself is recorded, and it was enough to bring Aerys out of the Red Keep for the first time since Duskendale. People at Harrenhal were shocked by the king's appearance. Aerys was thin and unkempt, with long hair and nails. He watched Rhaegar closely and seemed to hear conspiracy in every cheer. 15-year-old Jaime Lannister joined the Kingsguard during the opening ceremonies. Jaime was delighted. His father was furious, because a Kingsguard could not inherit Casterly Rock or carry on the main Lannister line. Aerys made the insult worse by sending Jaime back to King's Landing before he could take part in the tourney. Tywin resigned as Hand soon afterward and went home. The Stark children were at Harrenhal too: Brandon, Ned, Lyanna, and Benjen. Robert attended as Lyanna's betrothed. Princess Elia Martell came with her husband, Rhaegar. There is a separate mystery here about the Knight of the Laughing Tree, a small, unknown knight who defeated 3 opponents and vanished. Lyanna is the most popular candidate under the armor. The books leave the name hidden, so we cannot use the theory as a confirmed meeting between Lyanna and Rhaegar. Rhaegar went on to win the joust. He defeated Arthur Dayne and then Barristan Selmy in the final tilt. As champion, he could crown a queen of love and beauty. Everyone waited for him to choose Elia. He rode past his wife and stopped in front of Lyanna Stark. The crown he placed in her lap was made from blue winter roses. Lyanna was promised to Robert, Elia was sitting nearby, and the gesture happened in front of half the political class of Westeros. Ned later remembered that this was when all the smiles died. Rhaegar never explained his choice in any published account. Perhaps he loved Lyanna. Perhaps he thought she mattered to a prophecy that had occupied him for years. Both ideas fit parts of the evidence, and neither gives us Lyanna's side of the story. The false spring ended. Early in the new year, Rhaegar and Lyanna vanished. Rhaegar took Lyanna less than 10 leagues from Harrenhal with several companions. The surviving histories call it an abduction. Robert believed Rhaegar had kidnapped and raped the woman he loved. That became the public story of the war. Book readers are still missing the one account that would settle it: Lyanna's. The novels have not revealed whether she chose to go, was tricked, was forced, or changed her mind later. The secret wedding and annulment shown by HBO belong to the adaptation. They have not been established in the published books. Brandon Stark heard the news while traveling to River Run for his wedding to Catelyn Tully. He turned south with a few companions and rode straight to King's Landing. Outside the Red Keep, he shouted for Rhaegar to come out and die. Rhaegar was nowhere near the capital. Aerys heard the threat and arrested the whole group. The king summoned their fathers to court. Lord Rickard Stark arrived expecting royal justice and asked for a trial by battle. Aerys granted the request, then named fire as the crown's champion. Rickard was suspended over a blaze in the throne room. Brandon had a cord around his neck and a sword placed just beyond his reach. Every attempt to reach the weapon tightened the cord. He died trying to save his father. Aerys executed nearly everyone else who had answered the summons. Ethan Glover was the only member of Brandon's party to survive. Ned became Lord of Winterfell, and the king sent Jon Arryn the order that opened this video: "Send me Ned and Robert's heads." Jon raised the banners of the Vale. Calling the banners did not produce a united rebel kingdom. Several Vale houses stayed loyal to Aerys, including House Grafton at Gulltown. Ned needed to reach the north, while Robert needed a ship home to Storm's End, so a closed port was a serious problem. Robert joined the attack on Gulltown and killed Lord Mark Grafton when the town fell. Ned found another route. He crossed the Mountains of the Moon to the Fingers, took passage over the Bight, and reached the north to summon his own men. Robert sailed for Storm's End and discovered the same split among his bannermen. Lords Fell, Catherine, and Grandison remained loyal to Aerys. Their armies planned to meet near Summerhall before marching on Robert's castle. Someone warned Robert. He reached Summerhall before the 3 loyalist forces could combine and fought each of them in turn. 3 battles, 1 day. Lord Fell died, while Catherine, Grandison, and Fell's son Silveraxe were captured. Robert brought the captives back to Storm's End and treated them well. Soon they were drinking with him, and later they fought for him. His warhammer drew attention, but this was the skill that kept enlarging his army. Robert could turn yesterday's enemy into tomorrow's ally. After Summerhall, he headed north to join Ned and Jon Arryn. He left Stannis behind with a small garrison at Storm's End. Then he ran into Randyll Tarly. Randyll commanded the vanguard of the Reach army. He reached Robert near Ashford before Mace Tyrell arrived with the main host and won the fight. Mace claimed the victory afterward, although his general had done the work. Robert escaped with most of his army. Ashford checked his advance and forced him north. It did not wipe out the rebel host. Lord Catherine, one of the men Robert had won over at Summerhall, died fighting on his new side. Mace marched to Storm's End and began a siege. Paxter Redwyne sealed the coast with his fleet, leaving Stannis and a small garrison trapped inside. The siege lasted for most of the war, so we will return to Stannis in Part 2. Aerys blamed his hand, Owen Merryweather, for failing to stop the rebellion. He sent Merryweather into exile and gave the job to Jon Connington, one of Rhaegar's closest friends. Connington was young, proud, and known as a good fighter. He also wanted the glory of ending the war himself. When Robert's march through the Riverlands became a retreat, the new hand chased him hard. By the time Robert reached Stony Sept, he was wounded and separated from his main force. The books never explain where he received the wounds. The people of Stony Sept hid him anyway. Connington occupied the town and searched it house by house. His men checked alleys and sewers. He offered pardons and rewards, made threats, and put hostages in crow cages. Robert kept moving between hiding places with help from the townspeople. His last refuge was a brothel called the Peach, which feels entirely appropriate for Robert Baratheon. Connington had enough soldiers to control Stony Sept, though control was not the same as cooperation. Every hour he spent searching gave Ned Stark and Hoster Tully more time to reach the town. Long afterward, Connington decided he had been too gentle. A harsher commander, he thought, would have burned Stony Sept and killed Robert along with everyone who protected him. One of his fellow exiles told him that Tywin Lannister would have done exactly that. It became an obsession for Connington. We cannot know if burning the town would really have ended the rebellion. He had the chance to kill Robert, did not destroy a whole town to do it, and spent the rest of his life blaming himself. Then Ned and Hoster arrived with a rebel army. The Septons rang bronze and silver bells to warn the residents to lock their doors. Rebel soldiers entered Stony Sept, and the battle spread through narrow streets, alleys, and across the rooftops. Connington fought in the middle of it. He badly wounded Hoster Tully and killed Dennis Arryn, Jon Arryn's cousin and heir. The royal army still held together. Robert finally came out of the Peach and joined the fighting. He met Connington during the battle, and Connington later remembered that he nearly killed him. Robert survived, the rebels took control of the town, and the royalists retreated without turning the defeat into a rout. Robert later gave Ned the credit for the victory. The bells gave the battle its name. For Aerys, Stony Sept ended any hope that Robert was a minor outlaw who could be dealt with later. Jaime Lannister remembered the king calling Robert the greatest danger to House Targaryen since Daemon Blackfyre. That comparison would have sounded extreme only a few months earlier. Robert had now survived Gulltown, won 3 fights at Summerhall, escaped Ashford, and slipped out of Connington's trap. More lords were joining him after each campaign. Aerys punished Connington for the loss. He stripped him of his lands and sent him into exile. The rebels used their victory to secure Hoster Tully's full support. At River Run, Ned married Catelyn, who had been promised to Brandon. Jon Arryn married her sister Lisa in the same ceremony. Robert attended. There was little romance in either match. The weddings settled an alliance and put Tully's soldiers firmly behind the rebellion. Ned stayed with Catelyn for about 2 weeks before returning to the campaign. In King's Landing, Aerys sent the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Gerald Hightower, to find Rhaegar. The prince returned from the south and began gathering the royal army. He also persuaded his father to ask Tywin Lannister for help. Tywin had ignored calls from both sides so far. He stayed behind the walls of Casterly Rock and waited. Aerys made another preparation in secret. After the Battle of the Bells, he ordered his alchemists to produce wildfire and hide it around King's Landing. Thousands of jars went under gates, streets, the Red Keep, the Great Sept, and the Dragon Pit. Rhaegar and most of the Kingsguard knew nothing about it. Robert and Rhaegar still had not met in battle. That would happen at the Trident, where black armor covered in rubies faced Robert's warhammer. The next video follows the Trident, Tywin's decision, the sack of King's Landing, and the truth behind Jaime Lannister's most infamous act. For now, Rhaegar is back. The 2 armies are moving toward the river, and the capital is already packed with wildfire.